6, 5, 4, 3.
Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And Ray Peterson is off on assignment, under the weather. I think under the weather.
Under the weather, yes.
So,
but still working,
yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah, so we're pre-taping on a Thursday before our Monday air date. And because they're, as they used to say, all holy hell is breaking loose within the news sphere.
Yes.
As we're taping, we're not even going to try to do a play-by-play. We're just going to try to do some analysis and assessment of some of the key stories.
Right, because by the time they see this on Monday, we're taping on Thursday, a lot of this will have rolled over to another chapter of what we're seeing today, which is a lot.
Yeah, and there may be even more breaking news. So, but there are, of course, two key stories that are dominating the news cycle: the aftermath of the Parkland, Florida shooting, and of course the ongoing Russia investigation. And so I'd like to start off with that Parkland shooting, just because the way the reaction to the students' activism that's rolled out from the far right and the alt-right has been troubling to me.
Okay.
But before I even get to that, tell me a little bit about what you've been hearing on the press covering these young people talking about this is just such an unexpected activism from these young people, or something to that effect. What have you been hearing?
I mean, that's exactly what I've been hearing. I mean, it's like, well, we didn't expect this type of uprising. We didn't expect the students to be leading this push to remove AR-15s from stores, to at least get some background checks on people who want such weapons, or at least to change things, to improve things. And the dialogue has been, wow, I'm impressed at these students
people coming out
of the woodwork
and being so active,
right, and seemingly grassroots. And it's and you and I spoke about this.
Yeah, the question that they keep raising is, well, can this last? And will this last? And is this just an aberration, or something to that effect?
And have we seen this before?
And they haven't even asked that.
Okay,
it's like, what a surprise!
Right, that's the point.
And can they beat the NRA, et cetera, et cetera? So, I mean, I kept hearing that, and I kept saying to myself, what vacuum have these people been living in? Or are they all so young that they don't have a clue of recent history of this country? So, I mean, as our off-mic discussion yesterday, the Vietnam War, case in point.
One good point, sure.
Folks, young people put an end to the Vietnam War. College students primarily, but they inspired a generation of their peers to get into the streets and get into the faces of the establishment and said, this is an unconscionable war. And the fight by young people to get this country out of Vietnam practically tore this country apart.
You have to understand, and it's hard for people of this generation to understand, and I just missed it because I was just too young, just missed the cutoff for the draft. I mean, I just missed that. And the lottery for the birth dates put my birthday kind of deep into the lottery anyway, so I wasn't going to get picked,
Long shot.
I was going to be a long shot, but if, this was serious stuff. You were drafted, you were going. Your life was ripped from whatever you were doing at that moment, and you were going to go to Vietnam to put on a uniform and do what the military told you to do. And, the students were smart enough, even 15, 16, 17-year-olds were smart enough to watch the news and say, why are we here?
Yeah,
why are we there? And why are we? Why are we going over there for what? Explain that to me. And I remember a teacher explaining to me, wouldn't you back up? Wouldn't you defend your mother if she was in trouble? And I said, my mother, I didn't say it. Somebody else said, my mother would make sense out of what we're fighting for. And it was something to that effect. I didn't say it. I wasn't that wise. But
I was old enough
Yeah.
to actually have been in that war.
Right.
And I had no problems serving my country, being assigned to do what I was assigned to do during that war. But in the course of covering whatever assignments I had to cover, quote, assignments, because I was on active duty, I was on flying status as a navigator, and I was flying in and out of Southeast Asia on a regular basis. But I could tell as that war progressed that what was transpiring was not what was being reported back to the folk at home.
Right, the narrative was not what you were seeing.
It was a totally different war to what they were reporting. And of course, fortunately for the American people, back in the days of the Vietnam War, there was no such thing as embedding journalists. They would try, but those reporters would get their crews and they'd go wherever.
Right.
And they'd be risking their lives, and a lot of people have some seriously hairy stories about being faced with lots of traumatic situations and seeing their friends die along the way. A lot of journalists died in that war.
Yeah.
But reports of the carnage and reports of what was going on and what was being done to the Vietnamese people by folks who were supposedly trying to help them. But that old phrase, well, in order to save the village, we had to destroy it, or that came out of the Vietnam War, I believe.
Right.
So the question of whether it was an honorable upholding of U.S. treaty engagements, and that's basically why I could fly in and out of there, because I understood that there were all kinds of Southeast Treaty alliances and all kinds of stuff that we were supposed to be living up to. But there's a way to live up to your treaties honorably, and there's a way to prosecute a war not honorably. And so I can say that we were not at our finest trying to prosecute that war.
Okay.
And so the kids were right to protest. And guess what? Because they protested at length.
Right. And loudly.
And quite visibly.
Yeah.
They
and that's an important point.
They turned the tide of the country. And of course, when I say that war practically destroyed this country, because some of those people, some of those young people got totally radicalized. When you got to the SDS, when people start bombing buildings and causing loss of life because they're so radicalized about their country not being in the right position, I always say on this show, two wrongs never make a right.
Exactly, and we both have a history at the University of Wisconsin where one of those bombings took place. And I mean, we were that predates me, but it's still spoken about on campus, and you know that was an extreme action. They actually didn't think anyone was in that room, but
they were wrong.
They were wrong. That was one horrible.
But killing people to supposedly save,
yeah,
stop killing, doesn't make sense.
That made no sense.
So
one of the sad points of the
that's one of the preeminent near history, not long history, near history of how young people they understand what the causes are, what the morality is, and what the just fight is, and they get out in the streets and they do it.
And they know there's a risk.
You protest on campus, you could get thrown out of school. You could lose your scholarship.
And some of the expulsions were automatic.
Yeah.
Like if they caught you on film, you were expelled. Mark Rudd, he was the big dissident on the Columbia campus. He wasn't, of course he was expelled, and he wasn't seen on campus for ages. And then when he came back, he was like a campus, he still is a campus hero.
St. Clair born.
Yes.
Great documentarian. He was in one of those Columbia student demonstrations, kicked out of school.
Yeah.
Didn't graduate Columbia because he was in one of those demonstrations.
Wow.
So people understood what they're up against, and they were up against the establishment, okay? And so they didn't. So that's one of the easy correlations for today's journalists to make. I haven't seen or heard anybody making that correlation. If they have, went right over my head, folk. Have you seen that?
No. I mean, and we're going to have to go to a program like Democracy Now! Or something like that for someone to do enough reaching back to get that point across.
Well, but that's why we're here, folks. That's why we call ourselves Media Wire. But the other young group of students, or young people, because some of them weren't even students, actually lit a fire and took what was a long, slow-burning fuse about civil rights, lit the match.
Right.
And those were young students who decided, no, we ain't taking this anymore. And so they sat down at lunch counters. They sat in wherever.
They got hit. They got stuff poured on them, spat at. And this is
got dogs put on them, got hoses, whatever. These are young people, college students, some high school students, all who said, and this is primarily in the Deep South, when if you did something like that, you could disappear, and a few people did disappear. Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes. I just saw a documentary this week that mentioned that, but go ahead.
And other people who are not as famous ended up dead, black and white. But that was fueled by young people, students, and some not students. And then the adults said, we can't have our kids risking their lives, and we're going to have to get out in the trenches with them. And civil rights came alive. So I'm sending kudos to Parkland students and all the young people, Pittsburgh, California, wherever those young people are walking out saying, we want gun control. We want legislation that's going to take care. It isn't a mental issue or solely a mental issue. It's all about the guns, not the people firing the guns, the easy access to the guns that are everywhere, easily bought. 18 years old, you can go in and buy an AR-15, a rifle, probably a handgun. I don't want to say that, but since you can buy those other things, I don't see why you can't buy a handgun either.
It's stunning, and I'm seeing some support from journalistic organizations like the Society of Professional Journalists. They're reminding students that protest that they do have rights. The Committee to Protect Journalists is, I think, doing some student activism aid if you want advice on how to properly, well, you protest the way you want, but they'll at least let you know what the history has shown as to what you can do.
Some rights that you may have in case they try to do things to you that may not be legal.
Right, and some rights that you might not have. Like they might have the right to expel you, for example, for protesting, but they can't, I mean, missing class they can expel you for, but they can't add on a charge of activism. I mean, you have a constitutional right to protest, and so certain things are protected, certain things are not. But the students of Parkland, they're starting to understand, no matter how hard they yell and shout, they're going to get pushback from the NRA, from politicians who are in bed with the NRA, and from politicians just in the middle who are too afraid to step out and be seen as partnering with the students. So they're, sort of have a triple play against them.
Well, it's worse than that, because I saw a Think Progress piece, which is a progressive online organization that keeps tabs of what's going on. And they've had a reporter, I think his last name is Healy, I'm not sure what his first name is, and I might be able to call it up, but he's been documenting the fact that not just the NRA, but the alt-right folk and the Breitbart people and all that have been trolling these young Parkland students online, and to the point where one of the students who's been actively speaking out about gun control and about the fact that the politicians are spineless and can't seem to get anything done, in addition to being called crisis actors and stuff like that, the kid's getting death threats on his Twitter account and getting death threats on his Facebook account, and so he had to temporarily suspend and get off Facebook. But in digging into that story and digging into a couple of other stories about those young people, like Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg, these are young Parkland students who've been very vocal and very active about wanting gun control. So now they've been demonized and called crisis actors, and they're getting death threats. But in addition to that, all these right-wing sites, whether it's Breitbart or 4chan, or there are a whole series of them that basically specialize in trolling. And
there are sites that aren't particularly right-wing, but they're often used as vehicles.
Fake news, spouting fake news, but calling the real news fake news.
Sure.
and like calling real grieving students crisis actors and stuff like that. There's a proliferation of that. And so because it's proliferating online, the social media companies have been asked, well, what are you doing about this? You've got these people who are grieving, who are have actual gripes about what's going on and what's not being done for their safety as regards guns and gun control, and now they're being labeled as actors and they're getting death threats, and you got all this stuff. And Facebook and Google and YouTube, they're all coming up with some very inadequate answers like, well, our trending, this is YouTube, our trending category is really something that's governed by an algorithm. It's not a human. And so certain things that pop up, the algorithm mistakes, and therefore it doesn't have the sense to know that it should not be in trending and it shouldn't be there. And we're taking steps to fix that. And in the meantime, all this stuff is proliferating. And all this craziness and all these people, what was it? If you Google crisis actor, all of a sudden, or if you Google Parkland student, up comes crisis actor. And so they're being demonized by an algorithm and by the fact that all those sites now monetize that stuff by getting clicks on these crazy conspiracy theories that they're spouting, claiming that these kids are part of a conspiracy against gun owners, and basically they're now being lumped as conspiratorial crisis actors, which I find unconscionable.
And it bothers me from the tech side because I'm old enough to remember when Yahoo was starting its search engines. That was actually in the very beginning curated by humans. You actually had to get to work to get listed in the database. And I remember trying to get the Deadline Club, the New York SPJ chapter, listed. And it was difficult. They had to, figure out what we were doing online. And, obviously the internet got too big for that. You can't have people curating search.
Everything is coming from all over the globe.
Right. So we eliminated the people. We got the algorithms. But now that Google and Facebook and Twitter and Yahoo are big enough to have a big enough staff, I think they have a big enough budget to hire a small team of of editors, simple news editors like
to oversee these crises situations,
exactly.
so that they can actually yank the unconscionable, distasteful against their protocol standards, which is what they're saying.
Exactly.
The algorithm missed the fact that it was against our standards and violated our standards, and so therefore it didn't get pulled down, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, myself as a newspaper editor, yourself as a producer for a TV network, I mean, you would see something come across the wire and you can make your own judgment as to, no, I didn't, I know better than that. Whatever that came from, we're going to have to double check that. We are not sending that out.
And usually the wire people actually had editors checking what went on their wires, as opposed to the wide open, crazy internet where anything goes and anybody can put anything up there.
And there was a multiple step before it actually somebody pushed the button and got it out on the national wire. But unfortunately, we have the algorithm, and that's not doing us any good right now.
So to pick up on the Parkland shooting, just because this is breaking news, that will probably still be in the news. And there are related stories we can talk about. The CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods was on Good Morning America day before yesterday, I believe, or yesterday. We're Thursday. It could have been Wednesday, Tuesday, but when we were on Monday, it was last week. The CEO says Dick's Sporting Goods will no longer sell AR-15s. And they also said they're raising the age for anyone purchasing any long guns in their sporting goods stores to from 18 to 21. Now, he got a lot of pushback about, well, Dick's doesn't sell AR-15s and blah, 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 so he's just capitalizing on a tragedy for publicity. Well, the guy explained. Did you
I saw the explanation. I mean, the Dick's Sporting Goods weren't selling it at the moment.
They had stopped it in Dick's, but they've got other brands.
They have Field and Stream.
Field and Stream and another one.
Right, and within their umbrella corporation.
Umbrella corporation, exactly.
And so they were
they were still selling ARs in those stores.
Right. They can't pretend they weren't. So now they've stopped. And but the pushback, like you said, was that he was just looking for publicity because they didn't sell them anyway.
Yeah, right.
And that's
which was a total lie, and a total falsehood, and or lack of knowledge on the part of the trollers who were trying to badmouth the man for making an ethical decision.
But this insult to our intelligence gets by a lot of people.
Oh yeah,
because they're
they
not
said
going
Dick's doesn't sell them anymore. So they say, yeah, I wasn't Dick's, they don't sell them. Yeah, but they don't know that Dick's also owns Field and Stream and owns, I forget what that other brand was. They had two other brands.
Right.
That was part of their empire that sold these weapons. And the guy said, you know what? Since politicians won't do something, we decided we had to step up and do something about this. And so one way to step up and do something is make sure we don't sell those weapons anymore.
And now we have, I believe, who piled on this morning?
Walmart. Walmart said they were, I don't know if they said they were going to stop selling, I don't know if they even sold ARs, but they were going to raise their age from 18 to 21. I didn't do an investigation on whether Walmart even sold AR-15, but since they didn't say they were no longer selling AR-15s, I didn't bother digging into it. Because if they did, they didn't say they were going to stop. They just said they were going to raise the age that you could purchase a weapon from their...
And I didn't do the extra step of research, so they
they may not sell AR-15s, but they sell a lot of weapons because Walmart sells to hunters and sports shooters and whatever.
And when it comes to weapons, I understand. I'm also a travel writer, so I see other parts of the country where guns are an essential part of life. People go and hunt for their food. So it's not like, New York where we go to the supermarket. People actually, and in the, certain states, they hunt rabbit, they hunt for their meals, and they need the long guns. They don't need the AR-15s. They don't need a concealed handgun to take down a squirrel. They
don't need an AR-15 to take down a squirrel. They don't need an AR-15 to hunt anything.
Right, correct.
Because an AR-15 will decimate whatever you're hunting, and you have worthless meat anyway.
There's nothing to eat after.
So I could understand a differentiation about certain weapons that you don't need to be banning for sports use and for living in certain areas, because you can live in places in the West where you need a weapon when you're out riding the range or doing whatever, because you may need protection from bears or anything.
No, there's serious mountain lion and stuff. Areas and whatnot.
I fully understand that and know that a lot of responsible people understand the use of the weapon and they know why they need those weapons and they don't want those weapons taken from them. And guess what? In states like that, I believe you can regulate them and you can have permits and you can have whatever, and people understand that. But this bit about thinking a semi-automatic weapon or an automatic weapon or anything like an AR-15 is part of your Second Amendment right to bear arms to protect yourself from the federal government or from crazy people attacking your country. No, that is not your right. And I don't care how the current Supreme Court wants to interpret the Second Amendment. I know, based on my very close reading of the Second Amendment, they were talking about a well-regulated militia. It's still in the amendment. Nobody deleted it. And guess what? None of these people walking around with the AR-15s who love to say they're not taking my guns because of my Second Amendment right, they belong to no militia. And any militia they might belong to will be one of these whacked out posse comitatus militia that's not sanctioned by a state or the federal government. When they say well-regulated militia, folks, they meant regulated by that particular state. So that if they needed to call up that militia in time of crisis, the men would still have their weapons, and they would not have to go wait for somebody to bring their weapons to them to help defend the state or the nation.
But what were those words? A well-regulated? That means you answer.
Militia, and you answer to an authority about making sure.
And that authority is the people.
The state government.
Yeah, but that's
who regulates the well-regulated militia.
But that's the people. Yes.
But
you're
they're missing those elected officials are regulating that militia.
Right.
It isn't some guy who lives in a cabin in the backwoods that says, okay, militia, it's time for you to come.
Right.
That's not what it was designed for. That's not why it's written in the Constitution. Okay? So they can misinterpret it all they want. And of course, this current Supreme Court, just like it says corporations are persons, which is a total abomination of what was intended when it was written by the folk who wrote the document initially. But people can misinterpret. Guess what? They misinterpreted slavery and owning slaves back in the old days. U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes.
Okay? So guess what? They get it wrong quite often. I'm not saying they get it wrong all the time, but they do get it wrong. And eventually, they change it.
And
so eventually,
yes,
we're going to change this craziness about anybody can own a gun because the Second Amendment says they have a right to it.
And that's just rolling back to our initial point about the students' uprising. Yes, they realize something needs to change, and if the law says this, then we need to change that law.
I love what I've heard some of these kids say. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but did I not hear one young lady and another young man say, guess what? We're 17, 18, we're going to be voting soon, and guess what? If you don't do right by us, we're going to vote you out of office. Well, I could have swore that was an exact quote.
That's good, but unfortunately, young people have a track record of not voting.
Because no motivation.
Yeah,
Do you think maybe they got some motivation now?
I hope so. And I hope they turn this action into votes, because that will make a huge difference.
That's why I'm trying to send messages into the ether through this video program. You young people, stick to your word. You say you're going to fight for change, you want gun control, register to vote, make sure you vote, and vote for people who think like you think and are willing to fight the NRA.
And we have about 90 seconds left. And change can be boring. I hate to tell that to students, but it's the truth. You have to show up at those city council meetings. You have to show up at those state board meetings. You have to talk to legislators. You can't just talk in the streets and then go home. You need to reach the people who make the change. So it's something I tell students. Change can be boring. You got to suffer it, because, that's the wheels of a government spin slowly sometimes. But you got to be a piece of that, the push, the people who push that wheel. And we have about 45 seconds left.
So, the other major story that we thought we might touch on, but because gun control and students being trolled needed to be discussed, and we discussed it. Keep an eye out on that story we said was going to be the big story of 2018, the Russian investigation, Russian meddling in our elections. President's communications director, Hope Hicks, resigned.
Yep.
Deputy Communications Director resigned, and all of this after having had some discussions on testimony about whatever for the special counsel. So things will be breaking even more. This has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
Catch us on YouTube at
Media Watch EVT.
And there will be a Twitter, and we're out of time.
Yes.